All right, Nuggets fans, welcome into Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends here at Mile High Sports and FanDuel. I'm your host, Ryan Blackburn at NBA Blackburn on Twitter, part of the Mile High Sports Podcast Network, and I am here. I am ready to discuss a couple of things that happened today. One was Nuggets related tangentially, one was not, but still a very interesting thing nonetheless. We'll talk about Kawhi Leonard. That story is wild. That story is crazy. If you haven't seen the news, I'm recording this on Wednesday night. Came out early Wednesday morning. There is a lot of controversy surrounding a recent Pablo Torre episode from Pablo Torre Finds Out that we'll talk about a little bit later. But first, we're going to start off by talking about Serbia and the loss that they sustained at the hands of Turkey. I don't think a lot of people expected Turkey to be quite so good heading into this tournament, but I was very impressed with what I saw from them. Nikola Jokic matching up with Alperen Sengun, and those two were awesome in this one, although, not going to lie, Alperen Sengun a little bit more awesome and more awesome in impactful ways than Jokic in this particular game. I'm not sure how much this one matters in general. This was the final game of group play. Serbia finishes 4-1, whereas Turkey finishes 5-0, undefeated in group play and really looking like one of the favorites of the tournament with the way that they've played. There are ramifications that we'll talk about in just a little bit, but more so I wanted to talk about this incredible game. Like, unfortunate that there was an outage from Courtside 1891 after I had been talking up their streaming service as much as I did. They finally had an outage that basically lasted half a quarter, and it was the late third, early fourth quarter that was missed and kind of took the wind out of the sails for me, trying to then figure out where else to watch it. But when we got it back on, a game back and forth. It had been going back and forth the entire time and was a really, really impressive game. The shot making in this game was impressive. Shane Larkin of Turkey, a former NBA player, former first-round draft pick, ultimately went over to the EuroLeague and has been dominant there ever since. He's been playing for the Turkish national team and has been unbelievable in like just the shot making aspect of things. And you could see the difference, right? You could see the difference between a Serbian team that has Bogdanovic and one that does not, and one that was very reliant on shoddy guard play heading through the first four games of group play, and then really was struggling in these closing minutes just trying to run offense because Turkey really amped up the ball pressure. They were trying to pressure those guards as much as possible. Aleksa Avramovic, who is usually the starting point guard for Serbia, went out towards the end of the first half, I want to say, or pretty close to it, and never returned to the game. I'm sure some other reporters found out, hey, what happened? What happened with Avramovic? Because he was the primary facilitator, playmaker guy who could get Serbia into the offense. I didn't like the way that he played initially, but clearly he was somebody that they needed, especially without Bogdanovic on the floor. And so they had to survive. They had to survive without Avramovic. They had to survive without Bogdanovic. They had to survive without Tristan Vukcevic, who was who's a young player, a rookie last year, but probably wouldn't have been much of a factor, but clearly also made the 12-man roster. So clearly Serbia is getting hurt. And you see the lack of guard play on this roster show up on a very consistent basis when you don't have Bogdanovic and Avramovic out there. And so Vasa Micic, who is a veteran of the Serbian team, one of the guys that was kind of the last cuts, the last decisions, he's been working his way back from injury. He was on the court towards the end of the game, made a crucial turnover. Marko Guduric, also on the floor, made a crucial turnover in the closing minutes, closing seconds, honestly. And Jokic, for as much as we've often seen him kind of take over a game, really put the team into position and just carry them to a win, he wasn't able to do that this time around, in part because Serbian team just struggled to get him the ball or chose not to get him the ball. There were times early in the game where Avramovic kind of looked him off and took a three, didn't really go well. And then there were times where Misic's rhythm was just not on and missed some open passes. Same thing with Guduric on the final possession that he had where he turned the ball over. And those plays, crucial in a game where every possession matters, where you absolutely need to be the best version of yourself that you can be. They were not that. And Turkey took full advantage. Sengun outplayed Jokic. His stats were better, but more than that, his impact on both ends of the floor was just higher. And Jokic often looked like a bystander at times. Oftentimes he didn't, but for the most part, felt like Serbia kind of didn't make him the focal point of the game plan as often as they needed to. And Jokic, the shots that he ended up taking, kind of, okay, here's a late shot clock three. He made one, missed another, and you just would like to see him be able to get the ball with a little bit more space, a little bit more like back to the basket, have an opportunity there. And he was never able to get the ball into a scoring position. So tough spot. Serbia is in a very interesting position now without Bogdanovic for the rest of the tournament. We'll see what happens with Aleksa Avramovic, their starting point guard, but they're suddenly vulnerable. A team that we were talking about, I made earlier mention, according to FanDuel, that just a few days ago, they were like plus 150 to win the entire thing. Now, at this point, FanDuel does not have odds on the bracket yet because it is not being set. I assume that once that comes back and once the bracket is fully set after tomorrow, or tomorrow being September 4th, once it's set by then, I'm sure FanDuel will have plenty of odds. They'll be able to put together a full list for what those should be. I wouldn't have Serbia at the top. I would have Germany at the top very clearly, honestly. I might even have Turkey above Serbia, just the way that they played, the depth that they have, but also the star power that they have at the top. I thought that the three top Turkish players between Sengun, Shane Larkin, and Cedi Osman were fantastic. And while Serbia was hitting some shots and they were staying in the game and there were plenty of opportunities that they did have, I thought Marinkovic played reasonably well. I thought Jovic even made some important plays, although he did look flustered at times. And these guys, clearly this matters a lot to them. And sometimes you make some bad decisions, make some bad plays. But there are a lot of times where Serbia just didn't make the right play at the right time. And in a game that only lasts 40 minutes, that matters even more in FIBA play. So it'll be interesting to see how this comes down. But I was reminded of the Serbia versus Italy game that I've made mention on this podcast before, back in, I believe, 2021 or 2022, where Serbia just were outshot. And in this game, I believe Turkey shot over like 58% from three. And for a while, they were shooting 60% from three. And if Serbia doesn't clean up their perimeter defense, that's just going to happen. There are plenty of times where Jokic and the backup center, Nikola Milutinov, were on the floor at the same time. That's not a great situation. Also, Filip Petrushev, when he's on the floor, Nikola Jovic, when he's on the floor, playing that big, you better get the rebounds. And Turkey was getting all the offensive rebounds as well that really kept some possessions alive. There were a lot of detail plays that Serbia was missing, and it was a pretty unfortunate performance from them. So we'll see what happens. I'm curious to see how it ultimately goes, but certainly felt like Serbia is a little vulnerable. And I'm curious to see what ultimately happens going forward. So far, because Group A and B, I believe it's Group A and B. Let me just check that real quick. Groups A and B, which Serbia's in Group A. Group B features Germany, Lithuania, Finland, and Sweden. Those are the four teams that are moving on. It would have been nice for Serbia. Basically, how the seedings go is that Groups A and B, like in the bracket, the number 1 seed in Group B is going to play the number 4 seed in Group A, I believe. Is that crazy? No, that is exactly correct. So Germany is the number 1 seed in Group B, and they will play the number 4 seed in Group A. And so the reverse happens in Group A, where Serbia is the number 2 seed in Group A. They'll play the number 3 seed in Group B, which is Finland. Unfortunately, the difference between Finland and Sweden is pretty significant. And Finland has Lauri Markkanen on their team, who has been going absolutely crazy in this particular tournament. So it's going to be very interesting to see what Serbia is able to do and how they're going to match up with a team like Finland. Lauri Markkanen averaging 25.4 points per game. Nikola Jokic only averaging 20.2. Obviously not the most important factor when it comes to it, but Lauri's been absolute flamethrower for that squad. Not the most efficient, but he is one of those guys that could win you a basketball game if you don't have the right matchup for him. So whether it's Filip Petrusev, whether it's Nikola Jovic, I'm not sure who's going to match up with Markkanen on the Serbian team. They do not have a great matchup for him, I don't think, with his combination of mobility, athleticism, explosiveness, and shot making. So it's going to be interesting to see whether they can actually do it. If they don't, that's going to be a massive, massive failure for this particular Serbian team. People talk about this being the golden age for Serbian basketball, for like a team that had such high expectations going into it. If they fail at this particular stage, that's going to be problematic for them. So obviously I don't need to like belabor that point, but I know a lot of Serbian listeners who are listening to this show. They are very frustrated with all the injuries, with all the decision not to bring Nikola Topic onto the roster instead of Vasa Micic. There are a lot of folks that wanted to see the young guy get out there. I thought Stefan Jovic, who's the other backup point guard instead of Micic, he was also pretty good in this game. Probably should have closed, but if Avramovic is not able to go, or at least if there are questions about his overall viability, availability, because he's not a perfect player, he's a great hustler, but if he can't hustle, that's a problem. It's going to be very interesting to see what ultimately happens with it. So I'm curious to see how Pesic manages his rotation. On the other side of the bracket, let me just pull this up real quick. Lithuania, so they are the 2nd seed in Group B. The only team that they ended up losing to was Germany. Lithuania is going to play Latvia in the round of 16. That's going to be a tough matchup for them. Between Porzingis kind of spacing out the floor versus Valanciunas being the bully on the inside. That's going to be very interesting. Not sure how much, like Latvia was a very difficult team for Serbia to get through. Probably a sign that they were going to be a little bit bothered without Bogdanovic. But between Lithuania, Latvia, I mean, obviously there's a lot of NBA talent on both of those teams. There's a lot of versatile players on those teams. I'll be watching that one. That one's on Saturday, September 6th at 9:30. I don't know what the actual time is there. Serbia versus Finland, Saturday, September 6th, 12:45. I wonder if that is Mountain Time for me or if that is at some other point, but it does seem like, actually, it would make sense if it was about Mountain Time. So hopefully that is what we're waiting for, and Nuggets fans can wake up. They could watch Lithuania versus Latvia and then Serbia versus Finland. So get to root for the Nuggets players, and that should be fun. Okay, when we come back, we are going to discuss, I'm going to skip the David Adelman stuff. I'll save it for a show on, I'm going to do a show, I'll probably do a live show on Saturday after the, I'll do a live show on Saturday after the Serbia game, and we'll be able to have fun, talk about that. But what I'll also do We're going to talk about Kawhi Leonard now. That one I think is going to be, it's a very interesting story that I know a lot of people are confused about. So let's try to shed some light on the situation. We'll talk about that next here on Pickaxe and Roll. All right, we are back. Pickaxe and Roll, thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Would really, really appreciate it. You always know, like, it can be very difficult to sort through resumes, wait for the right candidates to apply, trying to get in touch with potential candidates. Like, there's so many factors in why hiring is very, very time consuming. So, the future looks much brighter because ZipRecruiter's latest tools and features help speed up finding the right people for your roles so you save valuable time. And now you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ziprecruiter.com/audio. Over 320,000 new resumes are added to ZipRecruiter monthly, which means you can reach more potential hires and fill roles sooner. It's no wonder ZipRecruiter is the #1 rated hiring site based on G2 at ziprecruiter.com/audio. Use ZipRecruiter, save time for hiring. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. And if you go to ziprecruiter.com/audio right now, you can try it for free. Again, that is ziprecruiter.com/audio. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. Back at it. Pickaxe and Roll, thank you so much for tuning into the show. Very interested in this particular topic. If you missed it, this was pretty big news, and there were a lot of different things that happened as a result. Kawhi Leonard is not the biggest star in the world. He did win a Finals MVP with Toronto, but then immediately signed with the Los Angeles Clippers in the 2019 offseason. That obviously sparked a lot of it was a crazy moment. I remember there was an earthquake in Las Vegas right at that point on like June 6th of 2019, somewhere around there. And when that happened, it was very surprising, but then makes sense. Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, going back to Southern California, where they both grew up. They have ties there. They want to team up, things like that. And nobody makes much of it. And then Kawhi Leonard obviously has the injury that he sustains in 2021 following the bubble loss to your Denver Nuggets. Kawhi looked great leading up to that injury in 2021. That was an unfortunate reality, but ultimately a very tough situation. So he gets a new contract, and there were questions as not necessarily about why he signed the contract, but things had not really worked out for the Clippers. He's always hurt. There's a lot of concern about building around Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. Are you going to continue with them? Are you going to re-up with them? Is Kawhi happy here? Things like that. And nobody really batted an eye until this morning, and I'm recording this on Wednesday night. So Wednesday morning, Pablo Torre, who now at The Athletic with his podcast, Pablo Torre Finds Out, very interesting investigative podcast, tackles a whole bunch of tough topics. And he's also like one of the main reasons why the Malik Beasley gambling investigation happened the way that it did. And there's a lot of things that Pablo Torre does a great job reporting on, investigating. And this was a doozy. He reported that a company titled Aspiration, who was a jersey sponsor for the Clippers for 2 seasons, one that went bankrupt and pled guilty to fraud, was also had Kawhi Leonard as a kind of a shell, basically hiring him on to do sponsorship deals, but never actually asked him to do anything for it. And the premise of the podcast, the premise of the actual story that Pablo found out, he did some digging, went and looked at a whole bunch of different things surrounding Aspiration, talked to some Aspiration employees, and ultimately found some information that Kawhi Leonard is being paid a sponsorship deal with Aspiration, 4 years, $28 million, basically $7 million installments over the course of 4 years that lined up with that second contract that Kawhi Leonard signed in LA. And it's very unique because what Pablo Torre then immediately went to look for, it's like, okay, why would Aspiration sign this deal? Why would they commit this amount of money, this significant amount of money to a player like Kawhi Leonard and then not have him do anything? Because that's the thing. That's the thing that kind of sticks in my craw. It's like, why would they pay him this amount of money and then not have him advertise your product, not have him be a voice, be somebody that is present with the product? And what Aspiration is they actually like I'm actually not entirely sure what they do, but what I was talking about was they plant trees and they do what they need to do to get a whole bunch of not just athletes, but you've seen people like Robert Downey Jr. You've seen people, other like famous people have mentioned Aspiration and have endorsed their product, have endorsed what they do, what they're all about. And it was supposedly legit until it wasn't. It was actually fraudulent. But the actual transaction amount of 4 years and $28 million that you're committing to somebody without them even once mentioning you, representing you, showing any affiliation with you is so weird. It's such a very odd thing that obviously raises a lot of alarm bells. So Pablo Torre, doing the digging that he does, basically went to interview a whole bunch of former employees over at Aspiration. One of them said that deal for Kawhi Leonard was purely to circumvent the salary cap, which is a huge deal. Huge deal if that is true. And it's going to be tough. It's going to be really, really tough to prove that. In a subsequent statement that Shams Charania posted from the Clippers directly, basically the Clippers say neither the Clippers nor Steve Ballmer, the owner of the LA Clippers, circumvented the salary cap. The notion that Steve invested in Aspiration in order to funnel money to Kawhi Leonard is absurd. Steve invested because Aspiration's co-founders presented themselves as committed to doing right by their customers while protecting the environment. Obviously, that goes on. $243 million in fraud. Neither Steve nor the Clippers had knowledge of any improper activity by Aspiration or its co-founder until after the government initiated its investigation. There is nothing unusual or untoward about team sponsors doing endorsement deals with players on the same team. Neither Steve nor the Clippers organization had any oversight of Kawhi's independent endorsement agreement with Aspiration. To say otherwise is flat out wrong. The Clippers take NBA compliance extremely seriously, yada, yada, yada. So basically what they are trying to do is say they had no knowledge. What Aspiration and the Clippers and Kawhi Leonard did / agreed to, if there was any agreement, is not untoward. It's something independent. It is not something that we had knowledge / foisted upon anybody else. Clippers are trying to get out ahead of this. Shams obviously putting out that statement. He's taking the role of Adrian Wojnarowski, who's kind of representing teams and ownership interest and things like that. Shams used to be kind of a player's agent. Now he's taking all of the agency because of the lack of other kind of reporting stuff. All of this to say is that if Kawhi and Aspiration actually did this and the Clippers knew about it, were the ones to initiate it, were the ones to basically say, hey, we want to get you extra money here. This is the way that you stay with us in Los Angeles. Like, why wouldn't? Uh, why wouldn't Kawhi Leonard try to go to the LA Clippers, be in the same market as the Los Angeles Lakers? If the Clippers were not only paying him his max contract, but also paying him this other stuff on the side that they clearly knew about, things like that. That's the implication, is that if there was an attempt to circumvent the cap, that's obviously a huge no-no. It is something that cannot happen in NBA. It cannot happen in any league. If you want to be like hold players to rules and legitimacy and things like that, it's absolutely inexcusable if this comes out to be a true thing. So I hope that the NBA, like I think there was a statement from Mike Bass over at NBA Communications, is that they are aware of the threats, not threats, but the journalism done and are going to start an investigation. Now, the last time that happened with Malik Beasley and with Pablo Torre specifically, it was ultimately found no wrongdoing, or like the government's no longer investigating Malik Beasley for anything in particular. Now he remains unsigned, and so maybe there is still something that is following him around, and it's not just like a media member ruining a career or whatever. But I do wonder, like, there's at least a world where Pablo got this wrong, and there were other folks like Mark Cuban went to bat for Steve Ballmer in this situation, which pretty funny. Obviously, those guys are friends. They're owner and former owner who know each other really well in the tech industry. Like, they obviously have a relationship and were very clearly buddy for a while. Mark Cuban defended Steve Ballmer publicly, and I'm sure all owners will feel very similar on that front, where they want to protect their ownership and say, obviously, this is completely ridiculous. Don't look into any of our other dealings. Don't look into anything that we have also done. Because what if Mark Cuban was paying Dirk Nowitzki off the books? And it's one of the reasons why Dirk Nowitzki kept taking pay cuts throughout his NBA career. What if that's happening on a more consistent basis? Pablo Torre also mentioned Jalen Brunson. Not that he had done anything, but he basically let go of an opportunity to sign for an extra $100 million last offseason in order to add other players to the roster. His former teammates, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, letting him be able to sign a massive contract. Like Jalen Brunson, if he took less money and is getting money off the books to compensate for that from somewhere in New York, that's a huge story. It's obviously like cap circumvention and definitely not a competitive thing. Like, that's something that the league would have to put a stop to as soon as possible. So if this opens up a full can of worms for the rest of the NBA, it wouldn't surprise me at all if this was happening in more places than just with the LA Clippers. If that is at least a possibility, then Adam Silver is going to have a very interesting decision to make. Do you come down really hard on the Clippers if you find some form of wrongdoing, if they knew about this, if it was their idea, if there was an actual investigation being made and saying, yeah, this is problematic, you cannot do this? I don't think that is going to be what happens. If, like, because the penalty would be so severe, you'd probably strip the Clippers of at least 5 future first round draft picks, and then probably also void Kawhi Leonard's contract and not allow him to sign with the Clippers. That would be crazy. That would be a crazy situation. So that is the possibility of what a harsh punishment could look like, as well as a fine for a massive amount of money for an owner that is worth $80 billion or however much Steve Ballmer is worth. It's probably like just a slap on the wrist in that case. But this is also one of the reasons why to take it so seriously for competitive advantage. Ownership in Memphis, ownership in Portland, ownership in any other smaller market is probably looking at that thinking, well, these guys are just throwing around tens of millions of dollars if that's the case. Like to circumvent the cap, like that's a competitive advantage that like can't even factor in that those other owners are broke boy owners cannot even do or don't want to do. So I'm very curious to see how this pans out. I don't think that anything will actually happen from it, or the NBA will come out and say, or the Clippers will come out and say, no wrongdoing was found. Everybody's free and in the clear. And then maybe they do something quietly behind the scenes that we don't hear about that the general public is just not privy to. But would it shock anybody? Would shock anybody if that were the case? Finally, according to FanDuel, Clippers win total. It was set at 49.5 before this news came out. It is still set at 49.5. And that to me is notable because a lot of times if bookmakers, if the bookies kind of feel, hey, we think that there's actually something here, they will adjust things preemptively to try to take advantage of that. And oftentimes Vegas is the first to know in situations like this one. So no major movement so far, and it wouldn't surprise me if that's the first tell for when something like this actually happens. So it'll be interesting to see and kind of follow along with the Clippers, follow along with Kawhi Leonard, and see if Pablo Torre did indeed find out. That'll be very interesting to track. All right, folks, that is going to do it for this particular episode of Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends here at FanDuel. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Like I said, I'll be back on Saturday afternoon after the Serbia game. I'm very curious to see how that breaks down. Serbia is vulnerable. We'll see if they can make it through the round of 16. They've got 4 more possible games to go if that's the case, but Jokic is going to have a lot on his shoulders. Be very curious to see how it goes. Thank you so much, everybody. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button on the way out. I'll talk to you guys very soon.